Welcome to another section of the MyReads project tutorial series. We're going to continue from where we stopped from the last section. And in this section, we're going to start talking about the search functionalities that we need to complete. And that is, the details is here in the specification document. Before we go ahead and dive into the code, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please go ahead and subscribe. And if you do like my content, please click the like button. Okay, now into the code. So if we click on this plus button, all right, I think this is broken from the first section when we refactored our app and we converted our class-based components to functional component. So I didn't update this part. So we should just change this right here quickly to show fetch page and set that to true. Okay, that should work now. Okay, right now if we type something here, nothing happens. Conceptually, what we want to do is, based on whatever the user puts in here, we want to go ahead and make an API call and render the page with the data that we got back from making the API call. We have an API that we are already supplied with, which is the search endpoint here or API. So we want to pretty much get the content here. And how do we get the content here? Right now, this is not controlled, which means whatever we type in here, we are not storing in a state. So let's go ahead and do that first. Let's define a state up here. And I'm going to move all of these states that I have here. I'm going to move it up here. Okay, and let's define a state here called query, set query. I'm using the use state hook. So use state, and we're going to initialize it to an empty string. And in the input box here, we want to set the value of the input to the text, to the query. So if you come back here and type, nothing happens because we're not listening to the event, the unchanged event on this input box. So let's go ahead and write the unchange. So unchange, let's go ahead and take the event and then set the query with the target.value. And now if we type something here, yeah, we see what we typed. We can quickly console.log to verify that our state is getting populated. And open console, let's come back here and type something. All right. Now, what we want to do is when we get the query, we want to make an API call. We're going to do that in a use effect hook. Okay. And we talked about use effect in the previous sections. And one of the things we said was if we wanted to react to a particular state in our app, in the use effect, we can provide an array of states that we want to track. So if I put in here query, it means that for any time this query state changes, we want to run the function inside this use effect. Right now, let's console.log to verify that this is going to be called every time. Let's say call API. And let's go back here and type. All right, so we see call API. So right here, let's go ahead and call our API. So books API dot get, now no dot fetch, and we're going to pass in the query that then the data we get back, let's say data, let's console.log that. Okay, we see here undefined. So I think our query initially comes up, it's undefined. Before we type in something, it's actually undefined. So let's type something here, and we're getting something back from the API. Now, if the query that we passed in doesn't match any data, Udacity returns an object of this type. And let's pass in something that we know should return something. Okay, so this returns an object. So now we're getting data back. All right, let's not make the API call only when we have actual query param. So we don't want our query to be undefined. So and then we don't want to call our API with an undefined value. So I'm just going to say if query, then make the API call. And here we're going to say, so remember that Udacity actually gives us an error, an object that contains an error property. So I'm going to say now, all right, I'm going to say if data.error, right? If data.error, then I don't want to, let's just go ahead and say console.log right now. Let's console.log the data. Else, what we actually want to do is we want to update our state. We want to update some state with the data that we got back from the API. Let's call that search books. So search books, and initialize that to an empty array. And then right here, let's go ahead and say set search books and give it that data. Okay. And right now, if we go back here, let's log this right now. Actually, let's log our search books somewhere. Let's log it somewhere here. Let's say we're going to put it here. All right, let's say console.log search books. All right, and now if we type something here, we actually get our data from here. Okay, now what we want to do instead is we want to render that data. We want to render the data on the page. Now, we already have the ordered list here, and this is similar to what we did for shelves, where we gave it a list of books, and then we render each of the books. So let's just go ahead and copy the code in here for a shelf. Right here, we just map each of the books. Okay, to an actual list. So let's say this is going to be search books, and let's go ahead and import the book. So import book from components book. All right, and that should be fine. Okay, so if we type something here, all right, good. So now we're getting data back. Okay, there's some tricky things that may be happening if you start to make such query. You might run into different errors. So before we go ahead and solve for some of the issues we're going to run into with our current implementation, let me explain something further about the use effect. Now, Remember that each time we update this state, this function is going to run. Now, if if you return a function in the use of it, each time your component is getting unmounted, React is going to run that function. Okay, console.log unmount. All right, so if I come back here and I type a, right, you see that amount is running. I'm going to go ahead and clean up some of the console.log so that to avoid confusion. And let's see, console.log, let's remove this query. What else? Console.log, let's remove this data. Okay. And I think we don't have any other console.log. We have this one. We're going to remove this one. Okay. Now we only have this console.log. Okay. Now let's go back here. Let's say amount data from query. All right, let's put query here and let me show you what's happening. So if I type P, right, so you see amount data from P. It amounts the data from P, but remember we actually have PR here. So each time this state updates, what happens is that React runs this function in here, and then before it runs the function, it needs to clean up first. You need to clean up. You need to run this to say, okay, do we have any stale data? Let's throw that away. You know, it comes in even more handy, like when you have like a chat service or something. If you're subscribing to some information on it, you know, somewhere, you might want to unsubscribe. Something that has to do with like cleaning up after yourself. So this gets run. And why is this important? Now, if we type in PR, now while the data is being returned for PR, and we type PRO, and then there's data also being returned for this. Now remember that when we type PRO, PR data from PR should have been cleaned up, right? We shouldn't have to want to set state for the data that we got back from PR. We want to always set state for only the latest or the latest query time, the latest state. So we're going to define something here. Let's say that let's call this is active. So let's set is active here and let's set it to true, right? And now when it's active, let's only set this else. So if is active, right, let's go ahead and set this. Okay, what it means is that if I already returned state, if I already returned typed in a query for PRO, right, if I already type in state for PRO and then PR data for PR comes, I don't want to set this state. So each time that a state is updated, I want to go ahead and I want to go ahead and return set is active to false. Okay, so it's actually going to be set to false each time the state is updated. So for example, if I type in PR and then also now type in O, so PRO, now if PRO comes in here, and so each of them runs this, so it's going to be set to active, and whichever completes, say PRO, we're going to clean up for PR, right? We're going to clean up for PR and set is active of PR to false. So next time when data comes in for PR, right, that data is already stale because we actually wanting query for PRO. So the set state is not going to be, it's not going to happen here, and that's going to help us provide avoid memory leaks. So let's go ahead and try this one. Okay, let's try that PR. Um, let's see if is active. Then set such to true. Okay, and one other thing is, yeah, we want to set the books here. Also set search books to false to empty array. Okay, so that when we are cleaning it up, like if I type in whatever I typed, um, if I change the data, so whatever I type in here, and I update the state again, clean up whatever, set the data for search books, set it to an empty array so that nothing happens here, and then run and then try to get the new data. And in this case, right, if it's an empty array or an empty string, there's not going to be anything to get back. So this is going to be empty, right? No data. Okay. Um, so I think this should work. I think it should be fine. Let's say scalar, no data. Let's say, all right, so we have data for S. All right. Now, one other thing is that if we click on this, so we want to be able to move books from the search page to the actual main page. So we want to move books into different shelves. Right now, this is coming as currently reading. It shouldn't be. Let's see why. Let's see why. I'm going to log in the data here once again. I'm going to set this to, I'm going to console.log here and say data. Okay. And let's see what that is. Okay. So is there a shelf here? No. So there's no shelf property on this object. And yet this is coming in as currently reading. So let's go back to our books, our book component. And right here, we're actually getting book.shelf. We set the value to be book.shelf. So I'm going to say if book.shelf here, if there's book.shelf, right, if the property exists, I'm going to use it. Okay, I'm going to say book.shelf. I'm going to set it there, or else I'm just going to set this to none. Okay, so now let's go back here, and if I do this, this should be none for the most part. Okay, now we want to be able to move books from one shelf, so it should, so if we should be able to do that right now. If I click on this and I move to want to read, okay, if we go back here, it should be on want to read. Refresh. Okay, it's not there. Okay, let's go back here and see why. So we have change bookshelf on update bookshelf, and I think we deleted some code here. We should actually be doing something here. We deleted some code here, which is that we need to call books API dot update dot update. Yes, I think it's dot update, and then we pass in the book, and then we pass in the shelf, the where to, right? And this we deleted. So let's go back here and type something, and then let's move this to want to read. Go back here. Oh, all right. I'm gonna refresh. All right, yeah. So this got moved. Now, if you come back here and type P, this is still unknown. And Udacity, even though you call a book API.update and you updated the book, I think it still returns a book the without shelf. So how do we ensure that shelf, this book, we want to know the shelf that it's on. How do we do that? We can do that by by merging the two states, the books and the search books. We need to merge them. And what we mean by merge is that in the simplest terms, we just want to say, well, for each of the books that are here, if for each of the books that are returned by search, if the book already exists in our books state, okay, go ahead and update the shelf or update the book such that the book will have a shelf. Okay, because right now it doesn't have a shelf, and each of the books that we have in our book state do have a shelf. Each of the books that we have in our search books doesn't have a shelf property. We want to find a way to update the property on the search books to reflect the books that are on our in our main page, right, on our books object. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. The simplest case, now this goes into algorithms, and we're not thinking about performance here, but if I wanted to do this, I probably want to use a map because then you have a key value. So your key value pair, the key is going to be the book ID, and then the value is going to be the book. The other option is you can actually loop through each of them, which is going to be more costly, but let's just get it to work. Okay. So what we want to do is that each time we get, let's say that each time we get um, a search books, let's call another state here. Let's say constant. Let's say merged books. Okay, and set merged books and set this to an empty array. Okay. Now let's also use a use effect for that. And for the use effect, we're going to say use effect, and then we're going to say each time the search books gets updated, right? Each time search books get updated, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and update all the books, search books, so that each of the ones that do have a state and a shelf get the shelf property. Okay, so we're gonna say search books dot map. Let's say constant combined books or merged books, whatever, combined equals to search books dot map, and I'm gonna say for each of the book, okay. Okay, now I'm gonna say um, right, if map of ID to books, I'm going to come back to that, that contains book.id, right? Then I want to return map of ID to books. Okay. I want to return map of ID to books dot get book dot id. Okay, this is what I want to do. Now we don't have map of IDs. Else actually else I'm just gonna go ahead and return the book. Okay, and I'm gonna define a constant here. Map of ID to books equals to new map. Okay. Mm, Now, actually, I'm just gonna keep this one also in a state. Let's go ahead and keep this in a state. I'm gonna say constant um, map of IDs to book equal sorry, and then set map of IDs to book, and then I'm gonna make this a new map. Okay, and then each time that this books is updated, I want to also just go ahead and map the IDs, map it, make a map of it. Okay, and I'll come back to the actually right here when we set books. Now let's right here. So we set books. I'm also going to say um, I'm also going to create a map. Okay, I'm going to say create map of books. Okay, and pass in that data, right? And then whatever data gets returned here, I'm going to set that to the map of IDs to book. Okay. Now let's define this function. This function here, let's define it here and say that const of this equals to, now this takes a book. Okay, this takes books, sorry. And I'm going to say here, I'm going to say um, books dot for each. Let's say, okay, let's create a map here. Constant map equals to new map, and then I'm going to say books dot map for each book. Okay, for each book, do map dot set. I'm going to say book dot id and then book. Okay, and then I'm just going to return this map. Okay, map dot set. So we can just do it for each here. But anyway, so now we return this map. This map, whatever it is, we set it into our map of ID to books. Now this only happens when these are books object or state is being updated. Now within the use effect where we track the search books, what we want to do is, yeah, we already wrote the function actually. What we're doing here is we are combining, or I guess we are saying for each of the books that are in a search, right? If that book is already added to our shelf, to any of the shelf, go ahead and get that book instead. Use that book because that book we know has a shelf property. So let's go ahead and try this, and we have an error here. Constant query, what happened? Query. Map of ID to book, line 23. Line 23. Okay, actually, we don't need this one anymore. All right, because we define it here. Let's come back here and do P. All right, so this contains not a function. All right, what is the function for a map? All right, for contains, is it ASCII? I'm just gonna go ahead and look at JavaScript map. JavaScript map. Okay. And what actually is the property? Is it as? Okay, it actually has, right? Sorry. Let's have here. Okay. Let's try that again. And let's see. This book is actually on the shelf. Hatred of poetry. And the hatred of poetry doesn't seem to. So let's see what's happening here. We're supposed to return the one that has a shelf. Right? That's what we want. Oh, actually, we are not even setting it yet. We're not setting. So this is what we have. This is what we should use instead. So so we want to use merged books, right? So let's set our merged books. After this is done, let's set merged books to combined. And then instead of using the search books, let's use merged books. Okay, when we render, we're going to change it to merged books. Okay, let's try that again. P. Awesome. So now this has one to read. So if we go back here and look at the data, you see that we should have a shelf property. Ben Leonard, yeah. So there should be. Oh, yeah, not this one. I think this is the result from the search. Let's console.log the search book and the merged books. This one. Let's remove this one. And instead, let's console.log our search merged books. So console.log merged books. Okay. And let's go back here and try again. P. Right. So this is one to read. And the data actually should have, we should see that it should have a shelf. Right. So you see, have a shelf because this book was already added to a shelf, and the other ones don't have a shelf. You'll see that it doesn't have a shelf. So that's the trick we played there. We can continue. We can move books. We can still move books from one shelf to the other. And let's go ahead and move this to. Okay, so right now let's search. All right, let's search for something else. Let's move it to currently reading, and if you go back to the main page, yeah, you see the book here. If you come back here and type this should be in currently reading. This is one to read. The other ones should be on none. Okay, and we can move this back to none. Let's see if we move this back to none. Let's go back to our page here. It's not there anymore. And if you come back here and search, this is on none. And the same thing if you do this here and move it to none, right? And we come back to here, there's no book here. Okay. So our state, yeah, so we kind of like merged the state for the main and then the search page. I think that should pretty much solve for the features we want to implement. The search page has a search input field. Yeah. Okay. So does the search page have a search input that lets users search for books? True, we do. Do the search results allow you to categorize a book as currently reading, want to read, or read? Yes. Do selections made on the search page show up on the main page? Yes. Okay, I think that's about the features we want to solve for the search page. In the next video, we're going to look into routing, React routing. And you can see that right now, if you go to the page and you move here, you go to the search page. If you go back, that is gone, right? We want to be able to keep track the state, the history, and we're going to be using React Router for that.